Hi, Staci. Thank you so much for joining me today. Staci Millard is based in Canada and she services clients in Canada and the US. And I actually stalked her a little bit on Instagram. That's how I first came across your account. I loved seeing everything that you were putting out and the audience that you sort of speak to, and just you're so like chill and laid back about finance. And I thought, you know what? I want to talk to you because it's notorious in the interior design world that designers are really scared about money. I wanted to chat with you today about business and business setup and accounting and just all the things that new designers, when they're first starting out, what do they really need to know? What are some of the things that they can just kind of put to the side for now and not get too stressed out about? And some of the tips and tricks that you have, Staci, that you want to offer up to new designers in business that you think would help set them up a little bit better for success.
I'm totally down for this conversation. I'm so excited. Love talking to people who are starting out and be like, look, here's all the lessons I've learned and thousands of people that I've worked with. Like, don't do these mistakes.
Right.
So I'm excited. Yeah. I'm a fractional CFO, a mentor to small businesses, and I'm really passionate about people increasing their income while also increasing their impact. Because we all get into business and we want to do something great. Like, we want to be respected for what we do. We want to do it well, but we also want to make money while doing it. So super excited to be having these conversations. I have a background as a CPA. I spent so many years working with small businesses, specifically on the accounting side of things. And a couple of years ago, I got to the point where I noticed this gap of like, everybody knew that accountants had all this knowledge and they were kind of safeguarding it. Also, on the accountant side of thing, we've got all these standards that we have to keep up with and all these tax standards. And it left this gap of like, people aren't really helping small businesses with their money. They're just helping them with like tax compliance, but that doesn't get your business further ahead. And I'm like, who cares about how much tax you pay if you're not making a profit?
Right.
So let's like get focused on the right thing. Let's help you make money in your business and do it really well. And then you can talk to the guy who's got his head in the tax act and wants to help you make sure you're saving as much money as possible. But that is my focus. That's what I'm obsessed with. And I work with a lot of female business owners and I like watch those ripples in the community. My little girls are 6 and 8. And every time I get to be like, oh, mommy works with this client and like, this is what we do. And this is how they impact the community. Like that's what
cool.
lifts me up. So that's why I'm here. And I started an accounting firm in my basement, grew it to a team of 10.
Wow.
With obviously an office at that point, not my basement, but grew it to a team of 10. We were making well over 7 figures each year and just really enjoyed that. But I guess where everything changed for me is we did start hosting these like women's business events and talking more about how you make money and have a business that you love and you're not burning out.
Right.
And I kind of fell in love with that and less in love with taxes. So 2 years ago, I sold the accounting firm, passed it on to somebody, really with like, my hope was like, okay, these people are taken care of in the tax department and I can keep talking more about how you make money. So the one thing I learned for sure was making sure that while you're growing a business, you're also kind of growing your personal brand. I don't know if you've ever heard the saying before that your network is your net worth. And it's so true that those connections that you create, having a way to like stay in touch with them is incredible. So even if you're growing a business, like XYZ design company, still having sort of a personal brand of like, here's who I am as an individual and what I do. That is one thing that I wish I would have invested more time in. So it would have been easier if I'd been more strategic about that. Obviously, I didn't actually have a plan to like sell my business. So it wasn't really thinking about that, but I'd love to pass that along to others so that they can think about
that's a good tip. Thank you. The reason I reached out again, like I think I mentioned when we first jumped on here, was, your approach and just the way that you're a human, you're a person. You're not like the accountant talking about, profit and loss balances and, Excel sheets. And like, I know you probably do all of that, but you seem very, very approachable. And for me, when I was first starting out, most of my peers, my colleagues, like numbers, even though we deal in like measurements and feet and inches and square foot, like we deal with measurements and numbers, but we don't do numbers well. Let's put it that way. And especially when it comes to finances, I think there's like that left brain, right brain thing is a big deal for creatives, a lot of creatives in business. And so starting up a company and starting up a business, it takes a lot of courage, number one, but then trying to find out, what do you actually need to do? And what are some of the resources that are available to you that can help make things a little bit easier? when you're first starting out. So I'd love to sort of just hear from you, if we're speaking to brand new audience who maybe is in their first 1 to 3 years of business, what are some of the things that new designers should be doing to help structure their businesses from the very beginning?
So here's the thing. I think exponentially in anybody who's like bringing that like artistic, creative side of things, because of like the dominance of one side of your brain, you almost like have a little bit more of a challenge. Usually when I speak to people, they're like, in your industry, they're like, I'm not good with numbers. And
Yes, it's like all of
already,
us.
yeah, and already that concept's like kind of makes it a little bit harder to dive into the numbers. Here's what I want to say though. Like I started an accounting firm and I have a background in accounting. I was a full-blown CPA and I didn't look at my numbers.
Mm.
So first of all, I just want to like take the stigma away from it as like we actually all do this. Just about every I think I've only met one small business out of thousands that I've worked with who was like, hey, this is my first week and I want to pay attention to my numbers. Like
Mm.
that's very like
Unusual.
engineer type of thing to
Yeah.
do. So not many of us.
Okay,
And
that makes me feel better.
yeah, here's my advice for people who are starting out. There are two things that you need to measure. And yes, dollars are one of them, but the other is time. Because in your industry, you're a service provider. That means
Hmm.
time is money,
Hmm.
right? You're billing for basically the effort that you're putting in. That's what you're getting a return of financial investment for. So
Hmm.
you need to be aware of the time that's going into things. Starting out in business, there are a lot of things that we're maybe not getting an immediate return on. And what I mean by that is like creating relationships, but those relationships are going to be the thing that you invest in that have the best payoff ever when you're working with, for example, like realtors who are going to be coming to you like with a ton of clients. Those are referral sources. So you're investing your time and you want to be doing it wisely. Are you trying to find people who are going to have lots of people to refer to you? Or are you putting in a lot of time, like 1-to-1 to just get one referral, right? So you want to be smart about how you're working and really asking yourself, like, is there a return on what I'm doing? Am I spending my time in a way that this is going to have an impact in my business?
Hmm.
A great example of that is social media. Like, do you have to post 7 days a week? Or do you get the exact same return on your efforts only posting 3 times a week,
Hmm.
right? You want to be using your time conservatively. So you're measuring your dollars, you're measuring your time. The other thing that I think most people really skip is understanding what your like billable hourly rate is. A lot of
Yes.
people are like, "Ooh, this is what my competitor is charging, so here's what I'm going to charge." And I'm going to say like there's a few things that I see people do wrong that I'd like love to call out. So one of the things that I see is people looking at another competitor and they're like, "Wow, that's a huge rate. Like I don't know why they charge that. I'm going to charge less. I'm maybe coming from a corporate job or this other industry. And like,
Hmm.
I think I'm going to charge like half this price, or you have some imposter syndrome. You're like, I'm new. I don't know that I can charge that yet. And
Yeah.
you immediately discount yourself so steep. Now, what this does is, of course, this brings in an influx of work. You're half the price of everybody else, right? It's exciting. Everybody's like, oh, wow, I can get design at like half the price. Like, this is amazing. But it creates a really steep curve when you realize, oh, people charge this much because all of these other hours that they're like working but not getting paid for, or all these
Hmm.
extra hidden costs that are going into it. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, I got to raise my rates. When you have to double your rates over the course of a year to be like
Hmm.
really feeling okay about business, that is a steep hill to climb. And it's also very psychological because you're like, now you're
Hmm.
getting a lot of pushback of like, why are your rates double what they were 12 months ago?
Yeah, that's a hard pill to swallow for clients if you've
Yeah.
been working with them for a little bit, right? Like to come to them and say, hey guys, come January 1 or whenever, my rates are going up to X amount of dollars. And if they're not used to that, or you've been
Yeah.
really low and now you're coming to sort of the industry standard, that's a big shock.
And as
Can
you're
be.
growing, yeah, and like as you're growing, all of a sudden these people, like maybe you have a referral source who sent you work because you're cheap, but like now you're having to justify to them. And so then you kind of get beaten down emotionally when you're like,
Yeah.
oh, like, lost this client, they don't want to pay it, lost this client. And then when you get in that mood, you sell differently. You aren't as excited to talk about your service or the impact that you have on people.
Hmm.
And so then it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of like a spiral down. And then you like lower your rates and then you try and climb back up again. So one of my pieces of advice is, if you see that in general, the industry is charging a certain rate, there's always going to be a range. But if you are very far below that, you really need to check your rates and ask yourself why. The other thing is when you're looking at your rates, understanding like, what are your monthly costs? What do you need to be paid? What do you need for your living and your lifestyle? Make sure, that the family's fed that month. And then also looking at like, well, how many hours do you plan to work? How, also, how much do you plan to be spending on time, like, social media and your admin work? Do you have a team that's helping you? And taking a look at how that all fits into place. So what I do is I really look at that of like, how many hours, how much do I need to make, dialing it back to like, okay, on average, I'm going to be billing clients for about this many hours. So here's how much I need to make an hour. Look at that and compare it to the industry and be like, well, where do I land? And then how do I justify my rate? If I'm cheaper, then that's one approach. But if I'm more expensive, like, why me? What do I bring to the table?
What is your suggestion or advice for people when they're starting out and they do have that imposter syndrome? That's very common when I'm talking to new designers, is like, I don't have the experience. I don't have the projects behind me to justify, where sort of the industry average is. And I don't feel I can charge that, and all the stories that we tell ourselves. What are some things that people can do to help find that inner courage to be able to charge rates that, will help them establish themselves right off the bat?
One of the things that I would suggest is understanding that like that confidence comes from doing, and the confidence comes from experience. And it's no different than a kid learning to walk when they're like super tentative the first time. Like, we're going to be scared. So instead of letting it hold you back, it's like recognizing it and doing it anyways, right? Feeling the fear and moving past it anyways. That is the number one most crucial part. And then really from there, the other thing that I love to do is like make a list of just like things that I've done. Right? It may not even be related to your industry, but you're like, hey, I bring this aspect, or, I've accomplished this in the past and this was really hard and I did it anyways. And having that like proof list of like book of proof of, here's the things that I've done and I've accomplished, and here's what I know about myself is like, for example, I know that I work really hard. I know that I go above and beyond. So if a client isn't happy with their design, I know I'm going to bring some level of warranty. Like, I'm probably going to give them an extra revision on it because I really want them to be happy. So I'm worth my time. Where other people, you're watching maybe another designer and it's like, they're like, well, you don't like it, that's too bad, you got one revision. Right? So you're like, you bring your flavor to it where you're like, okay, why would I want to pay me? And you do have to find this level of comfortability with what you're charging. So maybe it's not the same as what somebody is at 20 years, but I promise you that as you build up, you will become more comfortable charging those rates because you do have the experience. So kind of just like embrace imposter syndrome, start with where you're comfortable and keep going. And if that means like doing something for free the first time, do it for free. I think that's so underrated with every single industry, is like, we all think we need $1 million businesses on day one, but like,
that's not realistic.
No. And
yeah.
the foundation of like day one and $1 million business are so drastically different. Like, you wouldn't even be able to handle the influx of those people. Start with one and focus your impact and learn something from the experience, and, reflect on what went well, not just what went wrong or could have been done better, but what went well. Like, how was the client happy? And then use that to start building yourself up to be the person who can have, a larger multi-six-figure.
I find that so interesting because we're so impatient for things to happen, right? Like we were, oh, okay, I launched my business. It's 1 year, 2 year. I've only had a couple clients. Like, I'm not gaining traction. I figured I'd be so much further ahead right now. And I think about it and I'm like, but like, if you were given the opportunity to work on these big luxury projects, like, you would crash and burn so hard because you haven't built the foundation, right? And you don't have that experience to sort of lean back on and be like, this is what happens in this type of situation. This is how we solve that problem. These are the options. This is what this type of client is expecting from me. Like, all those things, right? So I think it's like everyone looks ahead and everything looks so rosy and glamorous and like amazing, when they have like that really good, profitable business. But the amount of work and sort of the lessons and the life experience that you have to gain first to sort of get to that stage to be able to run that successfully is like a whole other It's a whole other thing. And a
Yeah.
lot of newbies like don't, because they haven't been there, right? But they don't consider that. They sort of see all their peers looking like they're being successful and they're making it. And it's like, I'm struggling. I'm like, nope, that's exactly where I was when I was in like year 1, 2, 3 of my business. And it's just that's normal.
But one of the things I would say is that we spend way too much time looking at social media and looking what other people do. And we
Mhm.
would argue that like, oh, we're analyzing their business model, we're seeing what works for them. But like, get off social media. Like, post the
Yeah.
content, don't consume the content because it just gets in your head, or at least it does for me.
Hmm.
So that's number one. Number
Hmm.
two, what really sells in business is relationships. Like,
Hmm.
you post on social media, it's going to be crickets because you're hoping people come. Like, this isn't, back in 2010 or whatever year, like when, social media, you could post a hashtag and go viral. Everybody's on social media now. We're
Hmm.
all, fighting for space. So then investing your time in relationships, like, especially for your business, if you're like very much in person in your local area, then get out and meet people. Maybe you get on LinkedIn and meet some realtors, or you meet realtors on Instagram on that way by DMing them. But like, it is about relationships. That is how you will
Hmm.
go further faster. So you said like, oh, if you enter the industry with already having those connections, it's true, it can happen a
Yeah.
lot faster for you.
Yeah.
But that is what I would say is like, stop worrying about all of like the shoulds, and I would consume less, especially when people are like, here's your framework for existing online. I actually, on the finance side of things, I've never seen a return on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think like social and our websites, like that's all just like social credibility and it's a way to sort of showcase our work. But honestly, like I don't sell on Instagram at all. Like
Mhm.
my design business, like I can't even remember the last time someone reached out and was like, "Hey, we have a really good, viable, large scale project, and we want to hire you through here." Like it's never come through social media. It's just and honestly, clients like won't even know that I have an Instagram account till like 6 months into a project, and then they maybe follow me. So,
Okay, I have one more tip that I'm like, I cannot blow
mm,
past this. So,
hmm.
one of the mistakes that we see when people are starting out in business is we are focused on ourselves, and we are for a reason, because like, we are starting this business, we're like kind of figuring ourselves out.
Hmm.
But the problem is that businesses exist to serve a customer. And this is a really hard pill to swallow, because it doesn't
Hmm.
matter what industry I work with people in, they're like, I want to do all these things, but they haven't asked the customer like what they want. So the one thing that will make a difference on how quickly you get there is how well you know your client. I'm not saying your assumptions, I mean actually being able to ask the clients like what they want, what matters to them, and being able to speak to exactly what they want. That is,
Hmm.
I was an accountant. Nobody likes accountants. We don't want to do our taxes. But I was able to explain to people really well how
Hmm.
I made their life better.
Right.
And that took me so far so quickly because I knew how to say that to somebody. So you really, if I was going to invest in one area to
Hmm.
get me there quicker
Hmm.
in terms of like being in your industry, is like, of
Hmm.
course, I mean, I'm a numbers person, so like I really want to encourage you to look at the finances. So you need to set those goalposts and like know where you're going, but it is being able to talk to your potential customer. And I would invest in something like copywriting. There's a book on my shelf. It's called Copywriting Secrets by Jim Edwards. Like, phenomenal book if you're into books, or like Maurice Forleo has a copywriting course. But like, that is what I would do, is like learn how to talk to people, not about the features, not about I'm giving you X number of hours and this many, reiterations of your design, but
Hmm.
how am I making your life better? Why do you
Hmm.
need me? How are they going to feel on the other side of working together? Because that's why people buy, right?
And then I'm sort of like seeing the breadcrumbs here. Tie that into when you're able to do that. Tie that into how that enables you to be able to charge higher prices and charge
Yeah.
more for your services.
What I would say is, when you don't know how to talk to them, it's a push. You're like fighting for their market share. They're kind of going like, well, I don't know how to work with you. And the person who can speak to those emotions will
Hmm.
always win out, even if they're a higher price,
Hmm.
because we buy based on emotions. So you're going to feel like you're really like fighting for something, and
Hmm.
you're almost like having to undercut yourself to be like, okay, well, I haven't hit you emotionally, but like dollars and cents, you can feel it in your pocket. So like, you're going to hire me. you don't want to be in that world. Like it's a race to the bottom. There will always be somebody then who will undercut you, who will charge less just to get a little bit of the market share.
Yeah.
So you really want to be working with people well. You want to be able to charge on the high end. And that means that you have to be able to connect well with people and provide them a service that they're like raving about afterwards.
Like we hear the word pain points, right? It's like, what are their pain points and how do you solve them? And then speak to those. And yeah, you're right. You're not competing then just like on a dollar to dollar basis. It's like the experience and then how you're going to solve their problems for them, which is like, it's so invaluable.
Two things you have to do in business. You need to make money and you need to keep money, right? And by keep money, I mean that like you have enough to pay yourself, you have enough to pay your bills, you have enough to grow if you want to, because like the idea of financial freedom is that you can take your business where you want to go next. However it is that you feel good in business, like when you feel good, you show up differently to sell, you show up differently to serve customers,
So
and it's
true.
like this upward cycle. So one, we're talking about like the marketing, like how do you know your customer? How do you get away from like, being nickeled and dimed on your hourly rate or what you're charging, what your quote is for a project? So number one, we're talking about like, how do you bring in the money? But then the other side of it really is like, how do you keep the money? Like, what is your goalpost? And where I see a lot of people fail to plan is they're like, well, I'm going to pay myself, after I make the money. So I'm just going to like keep pushing forward. They like throw a hourly rate or a rate out that's like, oh, I think this is, market rate. And like, this is what somebody else would charge. I'm going to charge that. And then they're wondering at the end why they're not making any money, but haven't really taken the steps to understand like what's included in that. Like, how many hours are you working? They probably feel like they're dying at the end of it. They're like, I've been working night and day and it wasn't worth it.
Burnt
Why am I
out.
doing it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really having like that clarity. And that's where I said at the start, like using time and money, it's like, okay, well, what is a good exchange? Like, what are you going to put into it? And when you're mindful on it, what I would say is that like clear is kind. So a lot of the time when you're not clear on where you're going, your customers are like frustrated with you because they don't know where you're going. They don't know what they're getting. And like, that's not really kind to them and it's not kind to yourself. So the more clarity you can put behind something of like, this is what we're going to do. Here's how this is going to go. The better. And that comes from being intentional about business, how you do business, what matters in business. And again, actually just knowing your customers and what they want, not spending time on things that don't matter to them.
What do you have for a suggestion or a strategy in terms of designers that are located in markets that are really saturated with other interior designers? Like, for example, I'm in Kelowna and we have like, if you pick up a rock, there's like, we make a joke. If you pick up a rock, there's either a dentist, a life coach, a designer, or a realtor under the rock. So there's hundreds of everybody everywhere here. So our market is incredibly saturated. And for me, I found it I won't call it a struggle, but it was a grind for the first couple of years of my business to get established and get my name out there. And I didn't have clients here for 2 years. I had projects back in Manitoba where we just moved from. You're a Prairie girl too, aren't you?
I am. Yeah.
Where,
I'm
okay.
from Brandon.
Where are you from?
I'm from Brandon.
Oh,
seriously? Oh my gosh. Okay, we have to talk about this.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, Brandon, Manitoba. Oh my gosh. What year did you graduate? We'll edit this part.
04.
Okay,
04.
I graduated in 99, so we're a little bit spread out. Lost my train of thought, but yeah. Okay, so when the market is really, really saturated, and you just feel like, okay, wow, like if everywhere I look, there's interior designers offering their services. What are some little things that we can do to help kind of get ourselves out there and sort of separate ourselves from that pack? Because most clients, when they phone us up and they want to, they're interested in what we do, it always comes down to, yes, like how experienced are you and what do you offer? But it's, how much is it? Like they all want to know, like, if this is a luxury service, what's it going to cost us?
So if I was like day one and I decided I wanted to be a designer in Kelowna where it's like saturated, I think my approach would be that I would want to charge slightly less than everybody else, which is probably not what you want to hear, but like to start out before you're like, I want to charge premium rates. And I'm talking slightly, like maybe 15% less. It's enough that people notice, but definitely not like, oh, wow, like that's it. Like that is not why you're doing it. You're just coming in slightly below everybody else. But I would also really want to pack in the value. I want to leave myself room that I'm going to increase my rates over the next 1 to 2 years. And the very first thing I would do is find somebody who would be a really great referral source, and find a like project that's like not going to be like a whole year, like I'm going to design an entire house project. It's going to be something small, but
Quick.
that I can, but somebody who's what I would call is a referral source. So I'm not talking like, okay, my best friend's doing her kitchen, I'm going to help her.
Yeah.
Not at all, because she's only going to tell 1 to 2 people, maybe, like only have the opportunity to tell 1 to 2 people. I want to talk to a realtor. I want to talk to, maybe a land developer. I want to talk to somebody in that field. Maybe it's a like home store where they've got a whole bunch of home goods. Like, you want to create a relationship with them. Like, hey, I'd love to take some pictures of all your stuff. I'm going to do this design. Can we create a relationship? Something that's going to get you in and seen by a lot of people. So that would be where I would be at to start with. And I would be out at every single business event, trying to get in touch with kind of those people and forming relationships. Now, if you're an introvert, because like I'm an introvert, I
I'm like,
find so much
I'm
joy
a
being at home.
extroverted introvert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's a skill that you build up, but you need to find a way to like say to yourself, like, okay, I'm going to introduce myself and get to know people. So number one, I would charge slightly less. Two, I would figure out how I can really pack in the value. Like I said, what do people want? Can you find something personal to like really make that touch? And number three is you need people's testimonials. You need people to give you a referral. So I would be asking, you have to get out of your own way with saying like, hey, would you mind, passing this along? Like, can you, if you have any friends, get used to saying that. Like, if you have any friends, like
Yeah.
your testimonial means the world to me. It would mean so much to me that you love this project so much that you've told your friends about it. So really getting out of your own way with asking.
And then when it comes to figuring out your pricing for your services as a newbie, how do we sort of go about that? Like, you touched a little bit about, you have to figure out your expenses, like your personal and your business expenses, to be able to know what you have to make to be able to cover your cost of living. What are some of the basic, like very, very basic steps that, instead of just arbitrarily pulling a number out of thin air, how do we understand what's behind that number when we're first starting out?
I'm going to be honest, if I was really just starting out, I would find a rate that's kind of like midstream and charge slightly less than it. I was mentioning, like, I think one of the shortcomings is that people always like really want to go less. They're like, wow, like I'm like doubling my corporate rate. Like, holy smokes, if I'm making that like per hour, I'm going to be, making bank. And that, like, that sounds fantastic, but you need to be kind of industry rate at a minimum and then work your way up. But then from there, what I would do is look at like, what are my monthly expenses to maintain this business? So you can look at your bank statement to do that. You can kind of see what's going through your credit card if you don't do bookkeeping. Look at how much you're spending on a monthly basis. Know how much you personally are needing to spend on a monthly basis, and then compare that to the number of hours. The reason I don't suggest that like right at the start is you don't have clients. So if you're like, oh, I want to make $100,000 this year. And then you're like, one project, I need to charge $100,000 for it. And like, it's a $10,000 project. Like, like it just doesn't line up, but you need to be aware of it as you continue to like build. So once you get past those first couple, then that's where you're looking at like, okay, what are my expenses? How much do I need to get paid? And how much, like a lot of the time, what I find is like the adjustment is what we're not maybe what we're charging, because the market kind of says like, I'm willing to pay this or I'm not, but what we're willing to put into a project. So maybe we're doing a little bit less, but for the same price, right? And people are just in love with us. So I'm very mindful of that. The other thing is, when I'm mindful of like how much I want to be making and how much I want to be working, I get pretty intentional about what I spend my time on. I've given this example. So like, I'm not a very like I'm creative when I'm influenced. Like I see an idea and I can put my own spin on it and I love that. But I need something to prompt me. Like I don't just come up with this stuff out of thin air. So when it's like time to do something on Instagram, I love having a screenshot with like an idea of something somebody in a different industry might have said. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to put my spin on this. And I got so many of these damn screenshots that I'm like, and then I got to organize the screenshots, and then I got to organize the folders, and like,
there's more work.
Yeah. One day I was like, what am I doing? So like now I have a rule for myself that like, I'm like, what if this is the question. would I be willing to pay somebody else to do this? So ask yourself that, like, am I willing to pay somebody else to do this? Like, do I think it's
Mhm.
going to be a return? So if you're like, hey, I'm going to go hang out with, like these people as this business event, you get intentional about like, I think I might actually be able to make some great connections at this
Mhm.
event, or like, no, or like we're, talking about something totally different, or my people aren't going to be there. And you're like, no, probably I wouldn't pay somebody to be at that one.
Mhm.
You're removing like yourself, and we always, when we give friends, we're always like, oh, from the outside in I can see this clearly, and you give your friends great advice.
Yeah.
Not asking yourself like, would I pay somebody to do this? It kind of like flips the script where you're like not assessing yourself anymore. You almost have that like outside in view and
Mhm.
can see things more objectively. So
This is just totally on like a little bit of a different
yeah.
stream, but in terms of like the accounting side of things, like what kind of software should we be investing in or not even investing in? Like what's the bare minimum someone who really doesn't know anything about accounting should be doing? Or when should we be bringing someone in to help take over so that, that part is taken care of and taken care of well?
To not get too technical, there's a couple different setups like in Canada. So we have what's called a sole proprietorship, where we
Mhm.
really are the business and we're just showing the income and expenses on our taxes.
Mhm.
And then we have corporations, which are their own entity. And because it's almost like you pulled up a seat next to you and you have another person there, well, we want to know like how much is in their bank account and stuff like that. Like if
Mhm.
you've paid for stuff on behalf of them, like you want to be paid back, right? So my answer is different based on both of those. On
Mhm.
a sole proprietorship, it could be absolutely as simple as like a spreadsheet. The idea there is really that you know how much money you've brought in and
Mhm.
you know how much money's went out in terms of business expenses. And you kind of have these categories: advertising, bank
Right.
charges, telephone, like things will fit into a category. If
Mhm.
you swipe your debit card and you're like, oh, like I wouldn't buy this if this wasn't business related, then obviously it's a business expense. We'll fit it on a line somewhere. Like, don't worry
Mhm.
about it. Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that would be like how I'm like, okay, should I keep the receipt or not? Proprietorships, like you could do something as simple as Excel. If you don't like Excel, there's other programs that make it easy. So something like Wave Accounting is
That's what,
free.
honestly, that's what I use.
Yeah.
And we
Okay.
give it to our accountant and he used QuickBooks and now he's a convert. He loves Wave. He just loves
Yeah.
how simple it is.
I will also like I used to hate QuickBooks. We had different programs, and I
Mhm.
used to hate QuickBooks. What I will say is QuickBooks Online does make things very easy for people, but there's also
Mhm.
a cost with it. So depending on how many transactions, like unless
Mhm.
you have a high volume where you like really want to take advantage of like some of the rules QuickBooks creates and stuff like that, then something like Wave is a great solution. But
Mhm.
QuickBooks can make things easy when you have a high volume of transactions because it kind of learns them and it starts doing things intuitively.
Mhm.
I've actually had clients bring envelopes with
Yeah, I
receipts
was gonna say
tallied up.
shoeboxes with stuff.
And if you're a
Receipts.
proprietor, like that's not a problem. Like put it in a pile, total it
Mhm.
up, and like that's how you can do your taxes. But the point is like it's not scattered, right? Like then it's still very focused, even if it's an
Mhm.
envelope versus something online.
Can you tell us a little bit about like the benefit of registering for GST? Like getting into the, because sometimes, like doesn't, oh, I'm not making 30,000 a year and whatever. But if you register and you can get your ITCs and your write-offs, tell us a little bit more about that.
Number one, like I highly suggest just about every business registers right away for GST. So yes, there is a rule that at 30,000, that's when you have to register. That's like a rolling 12 months, not every calendar year. So like if in any 20, like you hit that number in 3 months, you register.
Mhm.
But if you hit 30,000, you have to. The thing is when you are a business, every single person is paying, GST. Every single person in Canada. So depending on the province you're living in, that might be 5%, that might be 13%, but you're paying it on every purchase. The thing is when you're registered, anything that is business related, when you're paying that GST, you're getting that back. So instead of it being a business write-off and your tax rate is like a percentage, so you get like, maybe 25% back because you're like saving on tax, you're actually getting literally every dollar that you've spent on GST back. So you
Mhm.
register right away, you charge your clients GST right away, and then every GST, if you look at your receipts on what you're spending, all of that GST, that reduces how much you're sending to CRA. And the idea is actually that you like literally all of the money you've paid to those stores or service providers in GST, you're literally reclaiming it.
Like, so for example, I order $20,000 worth of furniture for a client through a vendor. So that's like cost of goods. And I have to pay GST. I'm not paying PST on that, obviously. But so I'm charged that GST. But when I go and resell it to my clients, like that helps to offset the GST I paid to the vendor. So that is in like so many different, like your meals and entertainment, your office expenses, your advertising costs. Like if you advertise on Google or you advertise on Facebook, and they charge you GST, you're able to claim that GST back if you have to remit.
So the interesting thing about this is like, if you're ordering furniture for a client, like you're already going to be at the rate where you need to be charging GST anyway. So like you're already kind of forced into it. I think where this like really applies to decision making is people who are like, well, I'm just providing, like an online design for somebody. And like, those are the people who are like, oh, should I register? Should I not? I'm not making much right now. Cause like if you're buying a $20,000 couch, like you're hitting the 30,000 month one, right? Like you're kind of forced into that decision. But yes, like, I mean, you're spending that money, you want it back. I think it's really important. And especially like with all the startup costs, whether you're ordering office supplies or, business cards or all the things you're paying for, maybe it's a website.
It adds up.
Yeah. And I would rather get every dollar I paid in GST back rather than like, oh, I got a 20% tax write-off.
That's important when, designers ask like, how should I set up and should I register? And it's like, well, I mean, yes, there's a bit more in terms of layers of accounting and remitting. It's not that much more, to be honest. It's, if you're on top of things and you keep track, it's not that bad. But the benefit of getting back the GST that you have to pay out on things that you can write off for your business expenses, why wouldn't you? A lot of designers work from home. There is the ability to write off a small percentage of your your home, your taxes, your insurance, like things that you use to operate out of your house. So there's all those things to consider.
Yeah, for sure. So where I like sold the accounting firm and I really love talking to people and focusing on how to make money. I did reopen another accounting firm. It's called Thrive Accounting. We have so many questions where people are like, I want both, right? Yeah. They're like, okay, like, yes, I really do want to focus on the money, but I also want the taxes. So I work with other service providers to like bring the tax piece and I bring this other one. So if you do have questions, like there's so many things we could dive into on the tax side of like, yes, even if you own your vehicle personally, there is a percentage to write off for business use. The same thing with your home if you're using that. A lot of the time, like when you're thinking about like your personal cell phone and like you stage maybe your house and you're taking pictures of that, how does all that apply? Like I'm happy to answer any of those questions. A lot of the time they become kind of personal, if that makes any sense, of like there's a little bit of figuring out like, well, how much people say, and it's like, okay, well, now I can break down the rules for you and tell you how it applies for you. But I guess the idea is really just like, if you're using it for business, like, would you be able to use this space for something else if you didn't have the business? Or would you be using your, like your vehicle and all this kind of thing of like, well, you had to get from point A to point B to do the job or the project. So when you're spending, keep track of that. And then you can ask your accountant or you can reach out and just like ask, how do I do, like, is this a write-off? How do I do this?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And it all just depends on your situation and where you're at and how much you're generating in profit every year and all of that too. But that's why people like you exist, which I think is really interesting because you work with, business owners really to help them sort of like figure out what makes the most sense for them and how they can make the most profit and, really consult on what they have to work with their own business needs. So tell me about I'm looking at your website here because I didn't want to forget this, but you have this business blueprint. Explain that a little bit more to everyone watching and then how designers can reach out to you and work with you if they want to help grow their side of the business.
There's really 5 like pieces that I think are really crucial when you're growing a business, especially as a service provider, in terms of like, how do I make money and how do I like feel good about doing it, right? Like income and impact, like without burnout. And so the business blueprint takes these 5 pieces and really helps you marry it together. To break down the 5 pieces, it's how much you're paying yourself, what your business expenses are, who your customer is, how much, like what your product suite is, what those offerings are, and the amount of time things take. So like that, when we fit those 5 pieces together, That might sound like a lot to make all meld together, but I promise, like, I break it down super easy. When you make that work is like, oh, okay, here's exactly what I need to be doing. Here's where I need to be spending my time. You're cutting things out that don't matter. You're
Mm-hmm.
hyper focused on the customer. So where I was saying earlier, like when you know how to talk to the customer and know how to make them happy, it's
Mm-hmm.
so much easier. So that program really, like, that's what it breaks down in a super, like, easy, tangible way for you to understand. So that course is available if you're like looking to, like, if you're hustling, if you're not making what you want, like, it really helps you get clear.
Mm-hmm.
There's also, like, my saying is, like, I would never go to university and not have access to the instructor or like the professor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's crazy to me. So there is like an option in there to have time with me so you can actually go through it and have like that expertise and be like, hey, so like, I don't know, this doesn't make sense. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
really important to me. So there's time in there for that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one way to work with me. I did mention the accounting firm. So if you do need that tax advice, that's we have that as well. And then really, like, the CFO side of things is there's options on how much time together, but I like to describe it as like a staircase. I love to work with people who are like, hey, I want to make more income. And we do it in a way that's like, you can afford this. Let me get you to the next stage. Like, let me help you build your finances. I'm going to give you some really great advice based on what you can afford now. Like, in an hour, like, let's hash this out. Let's give you those next steps. And you're really clear on, okay, what's going to get me to the next level? Where do I need to spend my time? Where do I need to spend my money? And then we kind of work on there from there. So I
Mm-hmm.
have clients anywhere from, $50,000 a year to $10 million a year in revenue, because we're really just trying to help, like, you build and create capacity and scale.
That's amazing. I think
Yeah.
that's like super crucial for our industry because, like I said, like we're just not 90% of us are not numbers people. Like we're just not
Yeah.
blessed with the like left and the right. I think I'm like slightly in the middle, but definitely more on the right side. But it took me
But
years. Like it took me years to sort of figure out the whole accounting thing. And like, we have an accountant now. We've had an accountant for several years, but in the first like 10 years of my business, you're looking at the accountant. And it was
yeah.
what resources are out there, what programs, what consultants can kind of help you out with knowledge and experience and help guide you, to do things better and to tighten up your systems so that you are running a more profitable business. It's so important. I think there's so many things we could talk about. And
Yeah.
I would love to have you come back. I think what we'll do is like in our Facebook group, I'm going to, once your video, we launch your live chat, I'm going to ask for some specific finance questions and startup
Yeah.
questions. And then we can have you come back and we can like do it almost like a Q&A. Tell us how people can find you.
The easiest way to find me is on social media, on Instagram. So at Staci, Staci.Millard. Also on LinkedIn, exactly the same name. And the Small Business School podcast, you can find me there as well. Those are the easiest methods. And then all the links are in those places.
I think it's super important that we talk about money because that's just one of those things that we get scared of and we're like, I don't want to go there, but you have to go there. If you want to grow your business, you have to be willing to go there. And it's once you get there, it's really not that scary. And I think it's crucial for new designers in business to hook up with someone like you to help them get to the next steps and give them that blueprint and give them that map so that they're not struggling like I did on my own in the beginning.
It doesn't happen by accident either. Like, you're not just going to stumble across and be like, oh, all of a sudden I have a 7-figure business. Like, it takes attention. So it's not about greed. It's not, about, killing your creativity or anything like that. It's just about being intentional about how you spend your time and your money.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Staci. I really appreciate your time and we'll have you back for a 2.0.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Enjoy the rest of your week.